consciousness is the starting point of reality.
Completely antithetical to that attitude in science.
What is reality?
We're now at this great inflection.
Video games and all of that is actually the most important spiritual tools we've got today.
The whole point of a virtual reality is to have useful fiction of causality.
Individual never gets enlightened. It's the enlightenment that becomes the individual.
Space-time is doomed.
Consciousness is fundamental.
Einstein's theory actually predicts its own demise.
Balance is not the ability to stand up, it's the ability to rise up.
Please like, comment, and subscribe.
So you're saying, why is the dialogue between science and spirituality important?
Right.
What is your view on that?
Well, I think that one could imagine several points of view. I'll mention a couple points of view and then say what I think is really an important aspect. One might just say, look, it's important for separate cultures to understand each other, just as cultures, right? So it's important for me to read about, as an American, to read about what's happening in Europe, just because I want to be generally educated. So that could be one motivation, that, spiritual people want to understand what science is up to. Scientists want to understand what spiritual people are thinking, but it's more just as a general education kind of thing. And that's perfectly fine. But I think that we may be looking for something deeper here in the sense that I think that science and spirituality both offer some unique strengths that the other side can benefit from, and have weaknesses that the other side can help. And so for me, I think that the strength of spirituality, one of its strengths, is that for thousands of years, many spiritual traditions have recognized that there's probably something beyond what we see, something beyond space and time in what we call the physical world. And they have urged us, especially the mystical spiritual traditions, they've urged us to pay attention to that possibility in various ways. What the spiritual traditions also have are certain practices like meditation and so forth that are extremely valuable tools for exploring in this area. And what they've lacked, from my point of view as a scientist, is the tools of mathematics and precise theory building. That's what they've lacked. So I think they've had their eyes in the right direction, I think, beyond space and time, but they haven't had the tools. And in fact, 1,000 years ago, science didn't have the tools. The tools of science are only in the last 400 years, and really only in the last couple hundred years have they really been sharpened. So these are brand new tools, effectively, for us. And so for me, it's no surprise that the spiritual traditions haven't benefited from these tools, because we just got them. And so now so the weakness on science's part is, and it's a dual thing to me. It's not all weakness. It's a double-edged sword. Scientists have focused on space and time and things inside space and time, partly because that's easier, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier, and in some sense, you need to start where you can, and so we've focused on space and time and objects in space and time, where we could really hone our tools, sharpen the tools of precise thinking, precise mathematical theories, precise experiments, and I'm not saying that we've arrived, but we've certainly brought the tools to a fairly sophisticated place. I'm sure that 100 years from now, that will sound naive, because we'll probably have even deeper tools and more sophisticated methods. But we've made a lot of progress in the last 4 centuries. And now science is to the point where it, I think, is ready, for a number of reasons, to go beyond space and time with those tools. And so this is why I think, for me, there needs to be a dialogue at this moment in human history between science and spirituality. That I think the scientists have looked primarily at things in space-time, so physics, chemistry, biology, neuroscience, and so forth, and for good reason. That's where we can make concrete progress. It's the warm-up. It's the easier, it's not easy, but it's the easier place where we can develop the tools. But we're now ready, and our own theories are telling us that space-time is not fundamental. We're ready to look beyond space-time because so science is actually sophisticated enough now to have good evidence on its own grounds, independent of spirituality, to say, okay, we need to look for something beyond space and time, something that the spiritual traditions have been saying for thousands of years. So there's a convergence that's really important. Now, my attitude as a scientist is that because the spiritual traditions have not had these tools, and in fact scientists didn't have them until recently, we get stuck with just words when we're trying to teach. And the words are a starting point, and we often, for our initial ideas and initial thinking about things, we have to start with words, right? But what we learned in science is it's critical to go beyond good ideas that are couched in words. It's absolutely critical, in some sense, to take our ideas and give them the attention and focus that they deserve. And especially spiritual ideas, right? They deserve deep attention and focus, and that means, from a scientist's point of view, of course it means from a spiritual point of view that for example, you're going to try to live by the best you understand, you're going to meditate, there's a practice aspect as a human being living your life. And so that's one way, of course, to take them very, very seriously. But there's this other way that I want to bring up, and that is, and I think the way to give this idea is to talk about Einstein or a couple other cases, and we can go into it. But so Einstein, when he was trying to come up with a theory of gravity, he in 1907 had what he called the happiest idea of his life, something words to that effect. And his idea was that if he imagine himself in an elevator, standing on a scale so he could weigh himself, and all of a sudden the elevator went into free fall, that he would be weightless. He would no longer weigh anything. And that was a brilliant idea. Now, if he'd stopped there, it would still be a brilliant idea, and it's a really good idea. But Einstein spent the next, 7 or 8 years giving that idea the attention it deserved. He spent those years learning mathematics, Riemannian geometry and other mathematics, tensor analysis, sleepless nights, struggling to take that idea, wrestle it down into a precise form where he really understood what the idea was. And after about 7 or 8 years, he finally broke through. And this is Einstein, right? This is not a dumb guy like Hoffman. He's a genius. It took him 7 or 8 years of intense study and concentration to turn that idea into an equation. And when he then had the equation, he became the student of his idea. A year after he published his equation, roughly, a guy named Schwarzschild, a German brilliant guy, studied Einstein's equation and realized that it entailed what we now call black holes. Now, Einstein had no idea, when he had his happiest thought about falling elevators, that thought would entail that there are black holes. Who is smart enough to go from falling elevators and being weightless to, oh, that means there will be black holes. There's no one smart enough on the planet, including one of the smartest people who've ever lived, Einstein. And Einstein actually didn't like it. He disbelieved in black holes for decades. His equations also told him that the universe is either expanding or contracting. It does not remain stationary. And he didn't like that either. So here's a case where one of the brightest men who's ever lived became the student of his own idea, but only after he'd made his idea so precise that it could surprise him and teach him. And that's what I want to see from the spiritual traditions, that we take ideas that perhaps have been around for thousands of years, and we wrestle with them. We push on them from various, it took Einstein 7 or 8 years. Who knows? It may take us 50. It may take us 100 years these are very, very deep ideas, to ask, what are we really saying? How can we really understand what these ideas truly are in a precise way? And can we make it so precise that eventually we become the students of these ideas? And one thing that happened with Einstein's theory is the mathematics not only predicted novel things like black holes and moving universes, which is stunning enough, it also predicts its own demise. His equations, when you bring them in together with the quantum theory, entail that space-time cannot be fundamental. So the very subject matter of his equations, space-time, his precise theory tells you that space-time is not the final nature of reality. That's, again, what we want from our ideas in science and in spirituality. Eventually, we would like to take our best spiritual ideas, make them so precise that we learn from them, but then eventually we should expect that if we've done it right, we'll eventually learn the limitations of our ideas and be pointed by our mathematical understanding of those ideas to look for a deeper understanding of reality. And my guess is that this is a never-ending process, that the very idea that we have the final word on things is the fundamental mistake. So that the idea would be, we take our current ideas, take them very seriously, make them precise, learn all the implications, enjoy learning all the implications of them, and then learn where that class of ideas has a hard stop. And we realize, as beautiful as that idea was, that's not it. There's something deeper. And so that's at the top level. We can discuss it in details, but I just wanted to give a top level my vision of what I think could happen. And I don't, as you can see, I'm not saying we'll have this by next week. I'm not sure we'll have it in 50 years or 100 years, but we can have it if this becomes a goal and we take seriously the ideas from spiritual traditions and then do the hard work like Einstein did. He learned all the new math, the Riemannian geometry and tensor analysis. That's not trivial stuff. That's hard, but bringing that kind of sophistication and intent of purpose and clarity of purpose to this will allow us to take spirituality to, I think, the next level.
There are certain kind of challenges with spiritual principles being injected into science, and that is, as we all also discussed the last time, reality, how we perceive reality, is a projection of our own consciousness. And basically, the easy way to explain this is if in the higher level of consciousness you have the concept of, chocolate cake, and you're trying to teach that to a reality where chocolate does not exist, flour does not exist, egg does not exist, butter does not exist. How can you make chocolate cake? Basically, to understand what is in a higher level of consciousness, you have to be in a higher level of consciousness. And this is why in spiritual traditions, it's not really about conveying information. It is conveying transformation and real expansion of awareness, because that is the premise of entering into that level of reality. And then you can observe it, but then also your intelligence changes so that you're actually able to understand it. Because there is, when you try to transfer one kind of set of natural laws and logic and observation into a completely different reality, it doesn't work. Because you will have all the pieces, but you can't put them together into a functional kind of or organic entity. It's impossible. And this is why, my work with scientists normally happens when they have hit the wall and hit the ceiling. And what I say is basically, you have to expand your awareness first. And that's what I assist them with, in trying really to expand their awareness so that they all of a sudden can see things differently and they connect. It's interesting that, the way we observe, the way we experience, the way we analyze totally depends on our level of consciousness. So it means, in a way, it is impossible to observe a higher level of consciousness from a lower one. However, you can observe a lower one from a higher level of consciousness. So basically what we're left with is trying to, spread the cookie crumbs. And through also scientific work, trying to assist the collective consciousness of humans in growing into greater understanding that will, have that result, that expansion happens. The spiritual traditions have always been about the personal journey. It's that individual's expansion and kind of fulfilling the full spiritual potential. And one knows that can never be achieved collectively. Science, to me, is about the collective journey. It's about finding those principles that can be applied to everyone, and also in the collective, the collectively projected reality. But that requires also for the collective awareness to expand. And, one thing I've often explained to scientists is that, when you are kind of trying to explore a reality, some of the things that scientists can find today did not previously exist in this reality, because the projected reality of humans has expanded, which means that laws of nature changes, and how life works will be slightly different. For each expansion of awareness, the changes in natural laws are very, very kind of, slight, but it can be noticed. But it means also that one will be able to discover things that one thought, oh, this has always been there, but since the projected, like space, has expanded, more will actually be a part of it. So you cannot separate, the observation from the observer. It is impossible. And this is kind of also the premise of your work. And this is kind of what we're entering into, is how also science can be a vehicle for the expansion of collective awareness, because that is actually needed for that projected collective reality to expand even further. But again, I think what science offers is that kind of collective approach. Understand the laws of nature that applies to the collective reality. And when you are in your personal journey, you're not limited by that. And that means that you can go further. You can have observations, and of course, finding out the mechanisms will not necessarily be important to you. It's the experience and how it transforms you. It's the transformation, it's the growth, it's the healing, it's the oneness that interests you. So yes, that is also the weakness in spiritual traditions, that it does not necessarily translate into anything relevant for the collective journey. So this is where science comes in. It has to go through science in order to become kind of universal principles that can kind of guide humans overall. And I think we've reached that point in history where, because science has expanded, one is starting to recognize that spiritual traditions and individuals of high consciousness, they're onto something. And yes, there is a weakness in conveying the results of the explorations, because often that is not even the point. And one knows that there is so much, it's simply impossible to explain. And I say, like, I tell people that the only way I can fully explain it is by lifting your consciousness, and then I can basically be part of what you are experiencing and assist you in kind of like creating the full picture. But we still have to try it. And to me, this is, it seems like an impossible task, but for me also, trying to kind of inject as much knowledge as possible into the scientific world, to me, has become somewhat of a sport, because I think it's possible, but of course, like, it's basically, conveying pieces of a puzzle, but it's a piece of pieces of a puzzle where, in the other, like in a higher level of consciousness, you can see the image, of the jigsaw puzzle. You can see, oh, that's a little pussycat, In the lower level of consciousness, you can't see that. So you only have the pieces of a puzzle, and you have no idea what it is for, because you're not there yet. But it will still expand the projected awareness. And I think also, as I mentioned last time, for spirituality to become more disciplined, to become less subjective, less based on just the experience, but also seeing that when you are in higher level consciousness, just like the great explorers, we have responsibility, to bring back information and try our best to make it available, so that it can actually benefit humanity. Because in a way, consciousness and the mind is the new frontier. And in that respect, I see myself as an explorer in the same way. And just like the great explorers, it cannot just be about the personal journey. It will have to be about, how can this benefit humanity in general? And science, as you mentioned, has reached a level where it's possible to kind of create an interface. And to me, that is extremely exciting.
Right. Agreed. And those are very, very good points. I think that the idea that spiritual traditions, an important aspect of it is deeper levels of consciousness, and levels that perhaps are in some sense alien to your current form of consciousness. And so there's the issue of how do you help someone to move to a deeper level of spiritual being or spiritual understanding. And I think that there are 2 or 3 different aspects to that process that one could think about, right? One would be the less alien aspect, which is to say, in my current frame of consciousness, maybe I haven't explored all the interesting possibilities that I should learn in my current frame, right? And so you could imagine just wanting tools from in a spiritual tradition to help people, short of transcending and going to a higher level, to more fully understand where they are now and to appreciate where they are there. That's difficult, but doesn't seem to be as deep and difficult as the process you mentioned, which is then how do you help someone to move to a fundamentally new level of conscious awareness, or a fundamentally new framework of understanding. On the first one, clearly the tools of science can apply there, right? The so I'll give you an example. Um, a friend of mine, Jean-Claude Famagna, um, who's a mathematician and a cognitive scientist, uh, developed a system, a computing system that he calls Alex, or Alec. And I forget if it's Alex or Alec, but anyway, what it does is it uses tools of cognitive science to build models of the knowledge space that a person has. So this computer will, it's trying to teach you linear algebra or something like that, and it will give you a couple little problems. It will ask you a couple questions. Look at what you respond, and it builds inside of itself an understanding of what your current cognitive structure is in this area. So it actually says, so it builds a knowledge representation of this person, says, okay, this is what they know, this is what they don't know, and then it actually figures out the easiest way to move you from where you are in the knowledge space to the next important step. So it knows exactly what piece you're missing, and it helps you by giving you just those little simple ideas or little problems to work that move you as quickly as possible through the knowledge space. And so that would be a tool that you could imagine in the spiritual traditions. It would be wonderful to eventually build like a knowledge space of where is a person, what are their hang-ups, what are their strengths in terms of spiritual awakening and spiritual living, and what would be the easiest examples, the easiest ideas to give the person that would be most effective in helping them to take the next step. So that I think, and that's not a trivial thing, right? I mean, to build these tools requires a deep understanding of what we mean by all the varieties of components of a spiritual understanding, and understanding what we mean by saying that someone understands this aspect of spirituality, but they're missing these aspects, and this is what we would need to tell them or suggest that they try doing as the quickest way to expand their consciousness within this framework. That would be what a wonderful tool if we could have that people could quickly learn to expand their consciousness with maybe it's not transformative in the sense of jumping to a new level, but in some sense inhabiting fully the spiritual level that they're at and fully embracing it, which my guess is that's probably a big help toward then the transformative
Absolutely,
steps,
because one of the approaches in all spiritual traditions is the understanding that the only way to take a step forward spiritually is to kind of exhaust, all possibilities, all learning, all expansion available to you in your current space, because that reflects your kind of level of kind of spiritual evolution. And you need to understand that kind of fully and become that space, which means that the expansion in that particular space will have to be complete, and that will automatically set into motion the process of expansion. And it's not possible to go into a real expansion until the expansion in your current space has been kind of fulfilled. So yes, I think this is one of the things that could be exciting. It's, developing tools for people to expand fully in their current space, because that will then trigger the more transformative processes.
I agree, and we're seeing what you're talking about of this idea that you sort of need to expand into that space fully and grapple with it fully before you're ready to
Yeah.
move beyond. We're seeing that actually in science itself with space-time. So we've been taking space-time as fundamental for centuries, since Newton or Galileo, and it's only as our tools have gotten so sophisticated, like general relativity, quantum field theory, and so forth, that we now understand that space-time cannot be fundamental. We That was our framework. Physics was about what happens in space and time, and that's how we thought about what physics
Right.
is. And now we're realizing that physics is not that. That was physics for the last 400 years, but we need a new idea of physics that goes beyond space-time. So physics isn't over. We're having to make this leap, but we couldn't make the leap beyond space-time until our current tools told us definitively that space-time is not fundamental. You now understand space-time so well that you understand that there has to be something beyond. And what's interesting is that physicists are now at this point, as we speak, they are searching in the dark beyond space-time with whatever tools, whatever flashlights they can. And the flashlights that they have right now they're using the mathematical structures that we have within space-time, trying to look at them very, very carefully and ask what aspects of these structures actually transcend space-time. What part of our quantum theory and our theory of gravity is not talking about space-time, is talking about something beyond space-time? And how does it, and so what we're seeing is there is a deeper structure and a projection into space-time of this deeper structure. So that's how we're getting this, and that to me is very intriguing. It suggests that's a concrete mathematical way of saying what you had just said, which is in the spiritual traditions, you understand that you, in some sense, have to fully embrace the current level before you're ready to move on to the next. And we're seeing that with physics. It's fully embraced space-time, really understood it, took it very, very seriously for centuries, but now we get hints from our own theories that, whoa, there's something beyond, and the theories then give us little pointers saying, well, I've already been hinting to you that there's something beyond that I've been projecting back into space-time.
Yes.
And that gives us a hint that there's not going to be a clean division between the process of learning within your current framework and the processes that help you transcend to the next framework. There may not be a fundamental disconnect between the two.
Exactly. But the thing is, what is important to understand here, that each type of reality is it will self-implode the moment it is fulfilled. It's basically, if you have a cake and you only have the cake until you have eaten the whole thing. Because basically, every manifested reality is the result of resistance. And in spirituality, what we say is basically you have to become the space, which means you not only internalize it, you become it fully. That is how the full understanding has been transferred. And because you're no longer in resistance, the space cannot exist. So the moment you get it, it's done. And it will no longer exist because you have no resistance to it. So it's basically each space will have that code, basically just like a jigsaw puzzle. The moment you lay the last piece, it's done. It's over. and it will implode. It will no longer exist. But it can only happen when you have laid the last piece of the puzzle. And then it's just like all of a sudden it's not there anymore. And what is interesting also, I mentioned last time the principle of fractalization. It basically means that all kind of levels of reality, it's because it starts in the other end. It starts in oneness, and then it gradually becomes more and more kind of removed from that and move into a deeper and deeper resistance. But mathematically, it's all the same principle with different levels of interpretation through resistance that dictates laws of nature. And basically, if you can think of, an atom, the more resistance there is, the slower it will rotate and vibrate. And it's basically like that. So once one has absorbed that resistance, all of a sudden you will vibrate differently, and then that will be the space. So this is also why, as long as you're still in a reality with a certain resistance, you can't go past it. But there will always be these clues, because it's still the same. All levels of reality are in essence the same, interpreted through resistance. So when we go kind of past that resistance, which is kind of local laws of nature, and when we then kind of lay the last piece of the puzzle, that will collapse, and it will be possible to then see the principle that is left. And that's basically when you see the image, of the jigsaw puzzle. You can only see it like at that very moment, and that will be the information that will open you up to that next level of awareness. But anything that is complete will kind of collapse, because again, it's the product of resistance. And so it's so important in science as well that yes, it's impossible to kind of penetrate the next level until one has exhausted every opportunity, every possibility, every angle, every approach. And then all of a sudden it will just like implode, because the code is there. And I think, where science is heading is that we will see this happening more and more.
I want to make sure I understand. First, I like several of the points that you made there, but I want to make sure I understand about the implosion aspect. And when you say that once you put the last piece of the puzzle in, you get the full understanding, and it in some sense it implodes and disappears. Yep. Can you just say what it means for it to disappear?
Okay, if you can understand that, everything in manifested existence is a projection based on resistance, right?
Right.
And it's the resistance in the observer. So the observer is the author of what is being observed based on the resistance in consciousness. So the resistance dictates vibration, level of consciousness, and therefore everything in existence will be a mirror of that. And the purpose of it is to then build that full awareness of one's own resistance. So it means that you are in a space until you have dissolved every single resistance to that level of reality. And it means that it will have to dissolve, because since it's a projection based on resistance, once that resistance is no more, it cannot exist.